Hello, welcome to another edition of Sonoran Sky Live. I'm meteorologist Pete Mangione.
I'm meteorologist Royal Norman. How are you doing today?
We're doing great, Royal.
Yeah, absolutely we are.
We're going to have a show, interesting show today. We're going to recap the very warm spring that we just had. In fact, a record-setting spring. Then we're going to talk briefly about what we typically see during the month of June.
Yep.
And then we're going to bring in Hens from Maricopa County and talk about flooding and the forecast as we go into the monsoon.
And that's going to be a fun conversation. Dan is great.
He is great, absolutely. All right, so first let's look back at spring, Royal.
All right.
This is probably no surprise to you.
Well, here we go.
The warmest spring
Wow.
on record. Royal, I mean, this one's not even close. Look at that, 80.2 for
goodness.
this year, 77.7 from 1989.
Yeah, and it has to, it has to do with that March, right?
Yes.
Where we had, what was it, 8 or 9 days of 100 degrees. It's got to be a part of it. But yeah, it's so out of whack. And we're breaking some of these records. People go, it's almost it's only 3 degrees. But 3 degrees taken over that time period is really a huge, huge gap.
It's huge. I'm glad you brought up March, Royal, because here are the March rankings. This one's even crazier.
Oh, wow.
78.8 was our average temperature in March.
Okay, so we were on top in March, yeah.
And look at second place, 72.3.
Oh, my. That's just amazing. That is amazing. Yeah, see, thankfully we had, what was the May that we just finished up? Thankfully that was what, like the 11th warmest or something?
Yes.
So it didn't seem so bad. It wasn't the top warmest, it was 11th.
People were actually saying, oh, this must have been a cooler than normal May, which it wasn't, but compared to March.
Yes.
It felt pretty nice.
Lately, it seems like it's been that way, yeah.
All right, let's look at April.
Right.
This one actually surprised me when I compiled the stats about a month ago. I thought, oh, we'll be in the middle of the pack, but we ended up third warmest April on record.
Yeah, that's a little surprising to me, too. That, you know, it seemed like we had an okay April, but again, weather memory is sort of short term. You know, it's a couple of years, and you think, well, it's because we've had such hot Aprils and such hot years the last few years that we're now thinking when we get something just a little bit above average, hey, that feels great.
Right. The bar is so low, Royal.
Yeah.
It is so low. And then you brought up May. 11th place for the warmest on record, but still 2 degrees above the average of 82.0 for May, where we had 84.1 as our actual average.
If you said to me that the entire year would be ranked 11th on the all-time temperature list for Arizona, I would take that.
Oh.
In a heartbeat.
Yeah, we'd be celebrating.
In a heartbeat, yes, I would take that.
All right, so I decided to group up June stats a little bit differently this time. The normal daily high for today is now at 101, but I basically took all the days since the year 2000 for the month of June and kind of broken them up percentage-wise of what we usually get. Probably no shocker, 64% of the time we're in the hundreds.
Yep.
23% of the time we're in the 110s. Only about 12% of the time do we get the 90s, and look at that measly 0.4% for the 80s.
Yeah, I know. That's crazy, isn't it? It's that time of year, triple-digit time of year where, you know, it is normal for us, but it still is sort of hard to take sometimes.
Right, and then when people ask me, are we stuck in the 100s forever, I say, well, not necessarily, but it's kind of likely. I mean,
yeah, till we used to say the second week of October, then we used to say the third week of October. No, we'll be in triple digits till Halloween. That's what we say now.
I remember you telling me that when I started working here.
Just changed over the years.
Like clockwork.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so I just wanted to show you a few extremes for the month of June. This is the warmest June on record. That was actually the first June I lived here, June of 2024.
Wow.
Here's how the numbers broke down then.
That's
well,
pretty amazing.
No 90s.
Yeah.
No 80s.
No.
Almost half the days in the 110s.
Yeah.
That wasn't great, was it?
No, it wasn't. You're bringing me down here.
All right, I'm going to bring you some better news, or at least
okay.
we're going to do a little nostalgia weather here.
Yeah.
This is the coolest June on record. Did that profile. No 110s.
No.
And look at that, about half of the days in the 90s, 10% in the 80s. That'd be nice.
If only, right? Yeah, and you know, there is a year, I believe it was 1911 or 1912, where no 110 was recorded.
The whole summer.
The whole summer. But in those days, they were being taken out, you know, back in a Stevenson screen, and it was probably at the post office downtown. And who knows if they, you know, a day got missed or something happened where a 110 didn't get described, or transcribed, I should say. But on the record, it's either 1911 or 1912. There's no 110 for that year for Phoenix.
I think I remember you joking about this. You said maybe they went fishing that day, didn't record it.
Or they, you know, there was a couple weeks off, and you know the Signal Corps couldn't cover it, and the postmaster couldn't cover, because there are all kinds of different people that were covering the temperature and the weather readings in those days. And I've actually seen old weather readings where I suspect, I know I'm just dovetailing out of your story here, but you know they're handwritten, and I've seen some of the handwritten ones ones in the early years, I'll say prior to 1900. I looked at a bunch of those, and there are literally days where the same thing has been copied 5, 6, 7 days in a row. I swear to you, I've got video of that, so it's just weird.
That's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
I love those kind of like historical insights.
Yeah.
All right, I promise. I think just one more I'm going to show you.
Okay.
I wanted to, I showed you 1965,
Yeah.
and you're like, all right, show me something more recent. So this is the coolest June since 2000. And yeah, we had about 53.3% of days in the 90s. That would also be not bad
I would
if we
take that.
repeat that, right?
Yeah, heartbeat. Yeah, anytime we could have a June with more 90s than triple digits, I'm in.
I'm in. Okay,
Yeah.
so now we've covered the past.
Yeah.
We've covered the present. Now we're going to talk about the future. We want to bring in Dan Hens from Maricopa County. He's the flood warning manager. Dan, thanks so much for being on Sonoran Sky Live.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen. Good to be here.
Absolutely. All right, Dan, so you heard us just talk about the temperatures of past, present. We're going to talk a little future weather now. And looking at some of the forecasts from the Climate Prediction Center and our forecast, a lot of these kind of lean above normal as we head into the monsoon. Is that sort of your assessment, and do you put too much stock in that? Because as we know, things can change so much week by week, month by month.
Yes. I think you made a good first point right there. All of our deterministic models and probabilistic models that are run by the feds in DC and NOAA are all kind of leaning bullish for a potentially wetter than normal monsoon. Not just for Arizona, but really for the whole desert Southwest, and still showing, warmer than normal temperatures, unfortunately. The heat's always going to be there. But I think it's cautious optimism to think that we're seeing the right kind of signs for what could set up to be a normal to wet monsoon.
Well, and the other thing, I've learned from Dan over the years too is that the monsoon is not Sky Harbor Airport. We've had a bunch of years where Sky Harbor Airport's done really bad, but in the county surrounding and around the state, it hasn't been so bad. So when the monsoon does get here, of course, it impacts our house. That means something to us or our neighborhood. But we have to understand that it's going to be taken as a whole and averaged out, and that's how we really understand how the monsoon's doing. Is that kind of a correct way to put it?
Royal, that just brings music to my ears to hear you saying that. Yeah. So, again, Phoenix Sky Harbor, we have our ASOS station there. That's our official monitoring station as of, the National Weather Service. They do a great job. Those records extend all the way back to the 1800s. I mean, you guys were talking about some of those records today, but it's so important to note, due to the localized nature of most of the thunderstorm activity during the monsoon, we've got to keep an eye on the whole 10,000 square miles that make up Maricopa County and really each one of the counties in the state. So yeah, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rain gauges spread around the county that are doing just that.
And I love that you're talking about that, because for anyone watching the stream right now and you're tired of hearing Sky Harbor get mentioned all the time, if you Google Maricopa County flood control, you guys have this amazing map with automated data, right? That's all over the place, and you can really get into some of those localized numbers, especially in critical areas where you have washes and rivers and streams.
Yeah, so what's one of the best things about you living in the Phoenix Valley and Maricopa County is you get to be a part of this alert system. We have over 400 stations, rain gauges, stream gauges, weather stations. They're spread out across roughly 10,000 square miles that encompasses our whole South Central Arizona. And yeah, all that data is on that live Google-based map that you should be familiar with, just because it's like opening up Google Maps on your phone. It'll load up on your phone, see how much rain fell to the closest rain gauge. Our rain gauge density is really kind of cool. It's gotten down to, it's roughly a 5 or 6 miles per rain gauge. So there's bound to be one close to you, especially within the Phoenix urban corridor area.
Yeah, it's an amazing system. Back in the day, we were lucky to get 5 or 6 rain totals around the valley when it rained, and viewers would call in numbers. And so this system being totally automated is fantastic. And Dan, getting back to, the quote unquote, well, I want to say it's supercalifragilisticexpialidocious Niño that a lot of people are expecting. So here's the thing. We do think all the maps seem that we are trending toward an El Nino to reach some sort of full extent sometime over the winter. May not even have much of an impact in the summer for Arizona. But this is what I like to remind folks is that, yeah, there's a high likelihood we'll have an El Nino, but there's only about a 25% we're going to have that super duper El Nino that everyone's getting crazy about. And just because we get that doesn't mean it's going to be more rain or more. What it means is the planet's going to be hotter.
Yeah. Yeah, the equatorial sea surface temperatures down in the Pacific Ocean there are definitely going to be warmer than normal. But I mean, you bring up a really good point there, Royal, and that's that you're going to hear all the hoopla about El Nino, potentially the super El Nino or just a strong El Nino. But we're looking, the process is a monthly to seasonal to multi-seasonal process. So it's not like a strong El Nino means that we're going to have a big rain event that occurs and that was all because of, the El Nino, right?
Right.
Again, we're looking over months, possibly fall, winter, and into next spring. And really, El Nino and its significance in towards the monsoon, it doesn't really even come into play until kind of the very end. And maybe we can talk about that more if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So I kind of nerded out here, Dan, and I looked back at, it was a weak developing El Nino in the fall of 2014. And I know it looks like we had some tropical moisture from Norbert, which created a lot of flooding September 2014 in the Phoenix metro area. So is that kind of what you were talking about, where, hey, sometimes the El Nino, it's developing in the fall, it can actually lead to a more active Pacific hurricane season, and maybe we can tap into some of those tropical remnants?
Yeah, Pete, that's it right there. So the one real pro that we can typically count on when we go into El Nino conditions, you tend to have a more active East Pacific hurricane season. So that's off the coast of Mexico, extending, almost out westward towards Hawaii. But all you need is one of those systems, that forms down near Baja California, kind of curve northward, famous one back in 97 with Nora. Or even Hillary in like 2023, 2024 there. But yeah, in 2014, for example, the remnants of Norbert wasn't even still a hurricane at the time, trailed up in September. And, we ended up seeing, I have the statistics here on this, actually 2.5 inches of rain measured across our entire network from that event. And an entire monsoon season, when average across our network is roughly 3 inches, that's basically an entire season in one event.
Wow.
I was going to say that's very impressive.
Yeah, those tropical systems help, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Or
Yes.
if they bring flooding, hurt temporarily, because we've had a whole bunch of issues, Dan knows this, where we've had tremendous amounts of flooding that have impacted livelihoods and impacted people's lives. Flash flooding is something we'll probably get to a little bit. That always impacts lives. But the rain itself, just taken as rain, we tend to think that's a good thing in the desert.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we're going to take a 2-minute break, and we'll be right back here with Dan Hens to talk more about the forecast and flooding. I'm ready to let. All right, welcome back to Sonoran Sky Live. Our guest is Dan Hens from Maricopa County. He's the flood warning manager. Royal, I think you had a question for Dan, right?
Let's get, no, it's trivia for
it's
Dan.
trivia.
Dan, let's get us all involved in this. And,
Okay.
Because this stuff just, well, Dan, you know how it is. It just bubbles up in my mind. So the monsoon starts for the state June 15th, and I don't know exactly when it was, but it was early 2000s when the Weather Service and everybody got together and sort of decided we're going to set dates for it just to make it, well, first of all, not a Phoenix thing. A lot of times the monsoon didn't get to Phoenix till after July 4th, traditionally. So not a Phoenix thing. The monsoon gets to parts of Arizona earlier, and then just set some dates. June 15th to September 30th. Doesn't mean you can't have a storm June 14th. Doesn't mean you can't have a storm October 3rd. Now, here's my trivia for you. Since they've been taking weather readings at the airport. Before it was Sky Harbor, I think it was called the field or the park. As long as there was an airport and they were taking weather readings out there, it has never rained on June 15th, the first day of the monsoon. How about that trivia? Is that cool? That's great trivia. I mean, that's just
we should.
Yeah,
that's why we got to make it the start, right?
Yeah, exactly. Someday we're going to get rain on June 15th, and it will be a party. We will have a party about that. That would be really great.
Should we move it just to June 16th?
No, I don't know. The June 16th it did rain. Yeah, but so that's one of those little things that just pops into my brain occasionally. I don't know why, but I can let you get back to your
That's
show.
a good one. I'm going to remember that.
All right, Pete, I'll let you get back to your show here.
Yeah, I love the trivia. I wanted to kind of just start very simple here. For people who have maybe moved here from the East Coast and don't really understand the Arizona geography that well, Dan, can you just explain what is a wash, and maybe someone who doesn't really understand the threat from a wash during the monsoon, how that kind of works?
Yeah, well, in most parts of the country outside of the desert Southwest, you have rivers, and those rivers run all year round. We do here in Arizona have some larger rivers like the Colorado River, the Little Colorado River, the Verde that run all year round. But most of our smaller streams and creeks are dry most of the year. And so the area where the water would normally be running is what we call a wash. And again, it probably spends, especially here in the valley, most of our washes are dry probably 99% of the time outside of our, summer and potentially sometimes in the winter rainy season. So it's really important to note that those lower depression areas, the wash areas, channels, basins, all of our parks are pretty much shaped below grade. Those are all meant to be that way because they collect water when we do get our rain. So it's important to be cognizant of it when you're driving around or in your own neighborhoods where your kids play and things like that. Washes, again, your lower spots, your natural lower areas, again, that are going to channel water when we do get that beneficial rain.
Yeah, the crazy thing about washes to me too is that, like you say, they're dry most of the time, but they can fill up, boom, just like that. And it doesn't even have to be raining when that wash fills up on you. It could be 10 miles up the road. And so that's why you really should just pay attention to the wash and not whether it's raining or not to make your decision on, hey, am I going across that? Which is, no, you're not going across water in a wash, correct?
Absolutely, right there. We never want anybody going across a flooded roadway. Again, you've probably heard this, and if you haven't, listen up. It only takes 1 or 2 feet of fast-moving water to float your car, send it down the stream. Even you folks with the big trucks, your dualies, your cabs, again, if that water's moving fast enough, it can still take your truck down the river, the stream, the wash itself. You don't know what's going on underneath. The roadway could have been washed away. There could be impediments, boulders. We always stress to folks, just wait it out or find another way. It's not worth your life. And again, as you said, Royal, these things, again, they're going to happen fast. The water will stop moving rather quickly. You may have to wait it out a little bit, but again, just don't. It's not worth putting your life at risk.
No, I look at it that way exactly, Dan. Is that your chances for things going bad increase enormously if you decide to go into a wash. And by the way, no one drives into a wash that's already flowing at 6 feet. They drive in when they think they can make it, and it's still rising, or there's an impediment, or they get off the road and the car gets a little kilter, and then the water starts rising on them, and that's when it becomes super dangerous. So yeah, I just like to look at it as a risk assessment. Hey, if I don't go across that wash, and if I turn around and go that way, my life is better.
Yeah,
yes.
Why do you think, and maybe this is more of a psychology question, that it's tough for people to make that decision? Because they see something and they say, well, that's going to cost me 5 minutes of time. I think that looks okay. I'm going to go ahead and drive on through that. There is something about the way the human brain works where you think you can make it, but it's just not a good idea.
Yeah. Some of the psychology that comes into that is, well, I know what it looks like when it's dry, because again, it's dry 90% of the time.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that deep. I know that spot, how it flattens out. But like we said before, if there's boulders in the way, or if the water's already, you know, taken out the asphalt, it might actually be 3 or 4 feet deep. And then on top of that, you know, everybody, we all live busy lives. You have kids, you have a job, you have obligations. And the thought is, I'm going to risk it because, you know, I have to get to where I have to be. Well, again, if you maybe just stop and think, you know, is it really worth, you know, losing all of this over a quick decision like that? Maybe people would hold back. Because again, we see it every year. People go through washes. You know, they get into really difficult situations. Unfortunately, sometimes that ends up with loss of life. So
yeah.
But the goal here is smart decisions.
And here's a technology issue too. You're driving around, everybody follows Google Maps. That's where I'm going to go.
Yes.
That's where I'm going to go. Okay, so we don't know for sure, but we do know, we have information that if there's water running in a wash instantly, Google Maps doesn't map it. We do think that once a road gets closed, that will show up on a Google map and reroute you. But in the early stages of washes running, give up on Google Maps. Google Maps might say you can go through there, but at that point, it's time to say bye-bye, Google.
Yes, it's a great point. I mean, sometimes we just blindly follow these maps and don't pay attention to what's happening around us.
So don't do that.
Absolutely.
I'm getting old, aren't I? Hey, should we take another break and finish up with Dan?
Let's do it.
All right, let's take another break, Dan. We'll be right back.
All right, welcome back to Sonoran Sky Live. Our guest is Dan Hens, Flood Warning Manager with Maricopa County. Royal, you have some more truth to drop on us.
Just a truth bomb bubbling
That's right.
up. There's Dan joining us. He's like, okay, what's he going to come up with now? Now, this is from SRP. I was just checking the water levels of the SRP lakes. They're down to 52%, which isn't terrible capacity. But what's caught our eye, Roosevelt, the big one, is down to 42% capacity, and it hasn't been that low since February of 2019. So 2019. Wow. In 7 years, it hasn't been that low. So Dan, we know that monsoon rain doesn't, generally speaking, help our reservoirs, but if that whole El Nino thing comes into play and gives us a kickstart late monsoon into snow time, that could be beneficial for us.
Absolutely. And I think really that's what all of us in the weather and water business are really hoping for. We had a pretty dry previous winter, especially if you're looking at the Western US, the Rockies, and down into Arizona. And it's the winter time, it's the late fall, and then you're November, December, all the way into March time where we're getting snow. That SRP and the folks that are keeping track of the big reservoirs and the ones on like the Colorado River are really needing to have good wet months there, good snowpack that then can translate to bigger inflows of those reservoirs, and then ultimately for our whole, water problem going on in the Southwest.
All right, Dan, I have a super nerdy question, but as long as we have it here, I'm gonna give it a shot.
Let's do it.
So I noticed with your rainfall gauges, the lowest measurement you have is 0.04. Was that kind of an arbitrary decision, or is that kind of just physically what's the easiest measured in like a small amount?
So that's a great question. Yes, all of our rain gauges currently measure in 400ths of an inch, because 400ths of an inch is roughly 1 millimeter. So back when we started up, the alert network back in the late 80s, early 90s, that was the standard at the time, especially for the size tipping buckets that we wanted. And even though we've gotten to the point now where you can measure in 1/100th of an inch, for example, which Sky Harbor, the other ASOSs do, we've kept that 400ths of an inch because we want to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples with all of our rain gauges. We didn't want to introduce halfway into our 30, 40-year period of record a different style of tipping bucket, which then means we kind of start the clock all over again, statistically speaking, when we go back in the climate records. So that's our main reasoning for that. But yeah, one millimeter, 0.4 inches of rain.
And that's why it goes up 0.4, 0.08, 0.12, 0.16, etc.
Yep.
Dan, you've been there for a long time. I feel like the flood district has made a lot of progress over the years, not just informing people, but informing the media and everybody about the weather going on in Maricopa County. Let me ask you, how do you feel like things have progressed?
It's been an absolute blessing to be able to come here. Yes, I've been here for roughly 15 years now. The alert network when I got here was roughly 230 stations, and we're now up to 430 stations, so it's almost doubled. And really what's driving the growth is Phoenix, the urban corridor is growing, right? Even in the last 15 years that I've been here, the city's growing immensely. All of the cities and surrounding valley has grown. And the more people that want to come here, we have to build homes to be able to keep up with them. The economies continue to grow here in the state. And again, flooding doesn't go away. The more people we bring, it tends to become more of a problem. So the infrastructure has to keep up with the growth of the state, the city, the valley, the county. And I'm proud to say that so far we've been able to do that. Again, as these new neighborhoods come in, we're going to have more rain gauges. We'll need more stream gauges to keep track of all the washes that, again, we're out in the desert that are now, have homes near them when people drive it.
And I think we have about a minute left, Dan. Just to reiterate a point you made to me 2 years ago when I interviewed you for a story. I think I was trying to get a top 10 list of top 10 most commonly flooded locations. And Dan, you were very careful. You said, Pete, I want to, be transparent. It can flood anywhere in the valley. That's an important thing for people to know, right?
Yes, and I can keep that really short and sweet here, okay? And in the valley, it takes about a ½ inch of rain in 30 minutes. That amount of rain, which in most other states is completely meaningless, but here in the valley, a ½ inch in 30 minutes or an inch in 60 minutes is enough to typically tax our gutters. So if you're on a roadways, you're going to see minor water ponding. If you're next to a wash, that's enough to get at least a small flow through a wash. So it doesn't take a whole lot of rain over a large area to cause problems here in the desert. Again, that's just part of life being here in the desert Southwest.
Yeah, it's incredible. I will say that we've talked about Indian Bend Wash a lot. It does its job. It collects water, brings it down to the Salt River bed. You always have to be wary of the Indian Bend Wash, though. I think that it's about 12 miles long in total, but that is a wash that fills up pretty regularly when we get those rains. Yeah.
All right, Dan, thanks so much for being on Sonoran Sky Live. Some great information here for our viewers.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
And see everybody. Show's over.